All right, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
Gesundheit. Tonight, we are wrapping up season 35 of Survivor, Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers. Due to the intricacies of scheduling things over holiday periods, we weren't able to do an episode last week for episode 13, so we'll cover that briefly tonight. But given that we know the ending now, I think that's probably we're going to have it all in one big mush, and rather than trying to go through everything scene by scene necessarily. I mean, like we might waltz through the notes, so to speak, but I think we're talking big picture here.
Yes.
So obviously we know the ending now. So first thoughts.
I was happy.
Yeah.
I found myself rooting for Ben. Yeah. Like actively like rooting and cheering for him.
Great.
So that made it a lot of fun, because he was he was the underdog.
Yeah.
Because he's had a target for a while, and it was, needed a lot of crazy things to go his way. Some that he controlled, some that he didn't, but was able to capitalize on. And I'm glad that he was rewarded for that in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my thoughts, I found myself as we came up to the end actually feeling like I could be happy with any of the three of them winning. I thought it was less likely that Ryan would win, but I felt like if it happened, I would not feel that was a terrible injustice. But I think my vote would have been to go to Chrissy. But certainly both she and Ben, in slightly different ways, each were able to make a very strong case.
Yes. I was actually very, very impressed with her final tribal council.
Yeah.
To the point that I thought Ben was a lock based on some of their just body language and some of the things leading up to it. And then when I saw her present her case, I thought that it might make it a little bit more up in the air.
Yeah, yeah. It was a good final tribal council for both the Chrissy and Ben. I think Ryan unfortunately was kind of just on his heels from the beginning.
Ryan, for the last couple weeks of episodes, at least,
yeah,
that's just where Ryan has been. He hasn't been able to, really. He hasn't been able to adapt. After JP was gone, he really didn't. His whole game plan was basically to stay alive. He tried to make some things happen, and he was a part of a lot of stuff, but he lost a lot of his mojo, if you will.
Yeah.
After the Cole and then JP like back to back, and then he needed the idol the next time, and then then there was the Lauren debacle, not debacle for and then the Ben bomb, the first one with Ashley, and then Ben bomb number 2. I mean, he really just couldn't ever get any traction. And, and especially with Ben making such a big thing for himself, Chrissy was responding in just a much more, even if she wasn't able to do as much, I guess the immunity wins. That's really where, I was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
That's seemed a lot more, she seemed more like a leader and a winner than he did. It really just seemed like he was around, Yeah. And I was fortunate because I like him, but.
Yeah, I did too. And it's like I was saying, I feel like I wouldn't have felt it was a terrible injustice if he won, but I didn't think it was likely, not with him sitting next to Ben and Chrissy. I think part of what you were just saying is, the challenge wins was a big part of that for Chrissy. And I think in ways that enhanced each other, in the sense that not only was it something that she could put as a selling point in her own pitch, but also just it increased her own confidence and her own willingness to play boldly. And it just, those two elements kind of reinforced each other, making her really step into the limelight towards the end of the game there. I think without those challenge wins, she and Ryan's game will look much more similar to one another.
Yes. Well, and let's also not forget that had she not won that penultimate challenge, I think it would be the one where Mike went home,
Right.
that he was the target, so I mean, because Ben's target, I mean, obviously, like he had, cause the last time he had the idol, his goal was to, again, keep it secret and just drop one vote on Chrissy, which, her winning that immunity literally saved her there. So it wasn't, I mean, yes, it certainly helped her confidence and differentiated her game, but it also kept her in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that, the selling points for each of the three, Ryan, I actually liked his approach as he described it going in, this idea of, I'm going to try to sell this idea that I was in control every step of the way, even though I know that's not true.
Right.
I liked that idea in concept. I think, unfortunately, there was just a couple of pieces where it was really impossible to make that sale, because things like, you were on the wrong side of the vote for a blind side or two. So how's that you in control?
Right. Because he just didn't really have anything else to go with. I mean, I think it was, like you said, I liked that he had a plan, and that he was going to try, because he recognized, he had really nowhere else to go because of how strong the cases of the two people sitting next to him were going to be.
Right.
Because, yeah, Chrissy was on the wrong side of those blind sides, but Chrissy then went out and won immunity so that she wouldn't ever be, and I mean, and also, it didn't play out this way because Ben beat Devin in that fire making challenge. But that right there, I mean, the fact that, like, she chose Ryan simply because she didn't feel he was even capable of competing.
Yeah.
Devin would have come out of that with as strong a case as Ben. Like, it would have been, it still would have been two very strong players against Ryan. Because, I mean, Devin, simply with Devin's attitude from the, I'll do it, sure.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like there might have been an instinct in some viewers to think, and there was even maybe a little bit of a pitch like this describing it from Probst, where this idea that his describing it as an opportunity is maybe kind of dumb, because it actually basically meant that, you could have been totally safe or you can be not safe. And he thinks it's an opportunity to be not safe. But of course, at the same time, what you were just saying is, if he did that challenge and he won, now that's another thing that he can say he did as for why he should win.
Right. Yeah, he can say, not only do people like me and I have a great attitude about these things and I managed to survive this long, but when it came down to it, I was the one that these two looked to get rid of the biggest threat.
Yeah.
And I did it. The only reason we're not sitting here all voting for Ben is because I beat him and I did it willingly and with a good attitude.
Right. Now, that said, I am going to totally give him crap for this whole thing. Whoops, broke the flint. Guess that means that I'm not supposed to practice anymore. Oh, well. Oh, Devin. And, I mean, it would have been one thing if, if he was saying, oh, yeah, I make fire all the time, so I don't really feel like I need to practice. But that certainly doesn't seem like that was the case exactly. So, like,
he definitely didn't handle it well under pressure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he didn't really even get flame by the time that Ben won. So, but yeah, so I think that Chrissy had solid strategy, if not flashy, in terms of her gameplay. But getting those 4 individual immunity wins, tying the record, that's a big deal. And that on top of competent strategic and social play made her, I think, a very good choice that I could have been very happy with her winning. In fact, that was kind of where I was generally leaning. But for a game like Survivor to talk about what Ben did, where just being the target week after week after week, back against the wall all the way through, and still just managing to scrape by every single time. I mean, it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, it really is. And one other thing I want to give Chrissy a lot of credit for is, the way that she positioned the 4 immunity wins, because she was really smart in identifying that one of Ben's selling points that he was not necessarily going to, he was going to touch on, but not overstate, is, his Marine service and his, PTSD and, his, what he represents that's greater than himself.
Mm-hmm.
And, I thought it was really admirable that instead of trying to find a way to tear that down,
Mm-hmm.
she just created an alternative narrative
Yeah.
for what she represents.
Mm-hmm.
And so they created 2 positive, like, hey, if you vote for me, you're voting to show, older moms who spend all their time, trying to work and deal with kids, that they can still, they can live their dreams and they can do these things and be successful at them.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have the Marine who, overcame his, all of the things that came with, with him coming out of combat and his inability to talk to people and, having, doubting himself and all of the, and his, he didn't really have depression, but, he had all these
Mm-hmm.
demons and he was able to come through that. And so you have 2 very positive narratives, which I really like because we don't see that all the time in this. And just in debate in general right now, there's so much of that, like, try to undercut the other position as opposed to show why yours is positive.
Right.
And so it was refreshing to see 2 very positive positions being played against each other, and Ryan also sensing that and not trying to undercut them. And that's why he went in. That's part of why I respected his strategy, is even though it was flawed, he went with the same
he
thing.
was
Like, I'm
making the
not going to
best
tear
of.
either of them down. I'm just going to try to build my case,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he rightly recognized that trying to undercut them would only make him look bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So, overall, and why I wanted to give Chrissy a lot of credit for that is it left me, not just happy because I was rooting for Ben and I was glad that Ben won. I was just happy with the way this all came down. Like, it just felt,
Mm-hmm.
felt good. It felt like 3 really strong people. I mean, even all the whole back end of this, I mean, everybody was a good person who was playing hard, who respected what happened to them, didn't hold grudges. We created these narratives about representing and doing positive things for the communities that these people represent. All of that's just fun. Like, it felt good. It felt, it was just enjoyable to be watching.
Yeah, I agree. And like, even before we get to the final 3, I think, just this last few episodes of the season, I feel like we ended up with final 7 or 8 that were all really interesting people and good to watch. I mean, like, even Mike, who for a long time was kind of just, he's kind of goofy and he's fun to watch on TV, but you don't necessarily think of him as a strong player. And I don't know that I would still call him a strong player exactly, but he certainly sharpened up more than he had been at the beginning. By the end there, he became an active participant in what was going on instead of just kind of tagging along or something.
Yeah, I mean, once he got separated from Joe, he really he created his own character, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, and Ashley, like I think, yeah, once we got down to
Yeah.
after
So
Joe, like Joe was fine, but Joe was like what, you know, Joe was more a character than an actual,
mm-hmm.
you know, anything else.
Yeah, yeah. I
Once we
mean,
got to
we've seen a lot of players like Joe.
right. So then when you got down to when it was the one that where Lauren went, which would have been one,
Yeah,
two,
Lauren was episode 12.
yeah, so 7 people were left.
Mm-hmm.
So Lauren had a really interesting, you know, story and
Mm-hmm.
narrative. Ashley was very interesting, like you said. You already touched on Mike. Devin, we talked about, you know, just his attitude and his
Yeah,
positive vibes that
turned
he
out to
brought to
be
everything.
so much more interesting than he seemed at the beginning.
Yes, I absolutely. And like I said, you know, and you talked about how Probst kind of made it sound like he was stupid for going with it, but at the same time, you know, what did he have to gain? Like, was he going to argue
Yeah,
with Chrissy and convince her
it's
that to save him? And
mm-hmm.
you know,
It's
what's from that? It's her
yeah.
decision.
Well, it's an interesting element to add to the game, and especially since Probst all but confirmed that this is going to be an ongoing thing. It's not just a twist for this season. It's like made it sound like, nope, just this is how they do it now. What do you think about that? That the twist of the winner of the final immunity essentially picking one person to come with them, and then everyone else has to do time fire making.
I love the adjustment. It's just like when they went, they saw a flaw in only having a final 2,
mm-hmm.
in that you would always just drag the weakest person to go up against.
Right.
And so by creating a final 3, you know, you end up with, you know, more strong players. But that's gone stale, and people have, you know, essentially figured out a way around it because, and again, like, you know, it prevents somebody like Ben. This was a great season to do it because
mm-hmm.
of Ben's narrative. So because of the way that Ben chose to play, which was strong, so strong that he was a threat to win, but then he saved himself instead of leaving it only up to the challenge or able to convince people by going.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically had to either come to they can put a hidden immunity idol at 4, which I wouldn't have liked that as the alternative.
Right.
Or they had to come up with some other way to allow us to not just basically get to the final 4 and the strongest contestant either has to win or goes home.
Right.
You know, and that's what was basically happening. So you know, they did solve the only weak, you know, you only come to with the 1 weak player in the final 2. But that's like I said, what the new problem they created was that if you were just like the best person and you had the best chance to win, you had literally everything was on that final 4.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one would take you, like you would just be cast out. So now by flipping it like this, we still have the opportunity for that person to earn their way in and still win if they were in fact the best.
Mm-hmm. And what it also does is it guarantees that that final tribal council before the one in front of the jury, like that you know, that going from 4 to the final 3, it guarantees that one's going to be uncertain until right at that very moment. You know, it's impossible for it to be a sure thing that it's going to be any one person.
Exactly. And you know, and I'm just like looking at the vote counts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it looks like, so essentially to my point, you could be the best person through 14 votes. But because you're that person,
mm-hmm.
and you don't win immunity on that 14th vote or whatever, you lose because you don't get to go.
Yeah.
And so, you know, 14 votes worth of work can be undermined by simply not winning the immunity. And that's where I like that this, you know, it doesn't completely like let you get a pass,
mm-hmm.
but it gives you that one last shot.
Yeah.
And as you said, it keeps things up in the air. It doesn't make it a foregone, if Ben loses, then Ben goes home. It's no, if Ben loses, we have to decide, who for sure should be in the final three and who could potentially beat Ben in the fire making.
Mm-hmm.
And then there becomes a very interesting decision, which this one was handled very easily just because everybody was pretty chill. But
Yeah.
that could get much more contentious.
Yeah.
If you have different personalities involved.
Well, and it's this great decision-making process for anyone in that position. Safety versus an opportunity to do one more cool thing in front of the jury.
Yep.
Maybe it will finally make people learn how to make freaking fire.
True.
I mean, it's a little bit like how, one of the other things that Ben was throughout this season was constantly the guy who to the camera would say all the things that we say at home, which is things like, why are you telling people all this stuff that you're doing? Why don't you keep that a secret? Why are you doing that?
Well, and that's another thing that I'm hoping, from a player perspective, that maybe some of that in the game changes. Mm-hmm. That people start to realize maybe it's worth playing your cards a little closer to the vest.
Yeah.
That there's an advantage in, knowledge. That's an asset. Because things have gotten pretty loose, and this group was exceptionally, free speaking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like they made a point of that in the reunion of how, like, for a season that was supposed to be all about secrets, the players sure weren't good at keeping them.
Yeah.
All except for Ben more than once with his idols. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, that was the other thing that, he kept kind of like the fact that the others let him find all of those idols. I mean, it's one thing to say, it's not going to be trivially easy to keep him from looking. But we saw several points where we know this is before he has actually found it, with them discussing, like, how hard should we be working to make sure he doesn't find another idol? Oh, I don't think, surely he can't do it again. And then he does. But yeah, like what he said about, I knew I needed it, so I got up every morning and I went looking. And I put in the effort and so that I found it. It's kind of one of those things where anyone who acts like you're just going to stumble across it, that's generally not how it's going to work, or at least the odds are against you. But yeah.
Well, and just what a cap on that the final one that he found, he stayed up all night. He did not sleep the entire night. And then just the beauty of, like, when he's about to pass out by the raft.
Yeah.
And kind of falls to the sand in, like, defeat is when he finds it. I mean,
yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah, it was just such a great narrative because it again, it capped off what we didn't see, which was that, we knew he found a lot of idols and we watched him find them, but the grind of, like, what we didn't see is all the days he worked and didn't find the idol.
Right.
But didn't get discouraged. And so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, this is not a direct connection to that piece of it, but one thing about Ben that I think I want to just address at least briefly is to say, I think the only thing in my mind that had me rooting for Chrissy a little bit more than him was just the idea that he definitely did what it took to get himself to the end. Once he was a kind of a permanent target, but and nobody has all of the perfection in this, in every arena, but his social game was pretty poor. I think that at least, in the last bit of the game, because I think even once it got to the point where his back is against the wall, we can all understand how that feeling might manifest. but I think that there were a lot of occasions where he could have earned himself some more social credits, so to speak, and chose to either gloat or turn cold instead.
Right. And you're right. I'd add that it ended up being part of his narrative, though, in
Yeah.
that, with the whole, part of what his challenges were coming out of out of Afghanistan was that he recognized he wasn't good at this. He tried to do this to change it, but yet, this exposes who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
Learn to be, trusting people and being social,
Right. So yeah, so I don't want to overstate the case. Like, it's not that I think it makes him a bad person or even an unlikable person, as much as, like, all of it is understandable, and I think that stuff really actually seemed to manifest more as a response to already understanding how on the outs he is.
Right.
But
your point, though, where it's relevant is that, and why I was highlighting that became part of Ben's narrative, is without the other parts of that narrative, someone else in the same position who played with the same attitude doesn't win.
Yeah.
They might have beaten Devin in that final fire challenge and gone to the end, and people said, you know what, like, you weren't social, you don't get to win, yet you got yourself here, congratulations. However, Chrissy did all of the other pieces a little bit better. Like, someone without that other part, without being Ben, that same attitude is, so this is not a replicatable game.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. And it's why I think that even though I think that some of his behavior was unlikable, when put in the broader context of who he is and how he played and what was going on, it's all forgivable. But it's one of those, it's like we've seen before with any player where they become dependent on success through one particular tool in the toolbox and then essentially let everything else go. So like finding the idols, he had pretty much just come to the point where that's my only chance. Finding idols and winning immunity challenges is my only chance. No one is going to let me stay around any other way. And he might be right, but I think that made him let the switch flip in his head that he didn't have to stay nice to people.
Right. And so where he's unique as a personality is that this is one of those times, as much as we always bash like the creating of a strategy because it's what you want to do, this really felt like, if he has that, well, hey, what would be required of me to get myself out of this? I am not capable of doing. Not that it can't be done.
Right.
And so, yeah, it ended up becoming eventually like, I have no other option. But he seemed self-aware enough to realize that I don't know how to dig myself out of this in the other way, as opposed to just saying, well, this is the only way to do it. So ultimately, it ends up in the same place in that it is the only way once he flipped that switch. However, I felt like he had enough self-awareness to say, I can't do this. I can't change their mind. That's not who I am. I'm not the kind of person who's going to figure out. I mean, you just saw it with the way like the Ashley vote went down. That wasn't helpful when because he got challenged by Devin about whether or not he would play the idol. And so he created this, oh, well, I'm going to play it now and turn you all against yourselves. That wasn't to advance anything. That was more just, I don't really know what else to do, and he's challenging me, so I might as well just be a jerk,
Yeah.
And that was when it kind of carried on the rest of the way. But I feel like ahead of that, going into like the Lauren vote, he had enough self-awareness to say, I don't have another way out of this. I myself don't know how to flip this once. Like, I can get Lauren out with this thing right now, but I don't know how to recover. I'm just going to have to go find more idols, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it does make him an interesting, complex player in all of that. You know what I mean? Like it's more like if we could imagine a perfect game, we could hope that he would be more gracious in his gameplay during those last few tribal councils. But at the same time, that's a lot to ask for someone who's under as much stress as he was. But it's also, we can say that as much as it's an impressive accomplishment that he made it to the end, that was entirely reliant on him actually finding the idols when he looked for them, and the fact that there was this brand new twist that had never been in the game before. Because without that fire making challenge, they vote him out and he doesn't make it to the end.
Yep.
So, he certainly made the most of the opportunity that he got, which is admirable and a success story, no question. But his gameplay would not have gotten him to the end without that.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so correct. Which is why, what we said, this is not a replicatable game.
Yeah. And I don't want to make that overstated either. Like, I don't want to be too hard on him because I think he played a hell of a game, and I'm not sad to see him win at all. I just felt like it was worth talking about that part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the thing, but that's what made this a satisfying win for me, is that he didn't play against the traditional narrative. And if things had worked the way that they typically do, he would not have had an opportunity to win this game. Mm-hmm. But what he did was, every time he was given an inch, he took a mile. The expression, like he absolutely, took every situation, and with what his skill set was, absolutely made the best of it. So yes, we could say, in the traditional game sense, being able to make it through that vote where Lauren was out, his other option would have been to create some disharmony within the others and find a way to get himself on a different alliance where he wasn't going to be the number one target, or somehow maneuver his way through that. That's not his skill set. His skill set was just to, find an idol. Oh, fire making challenge. Well, I'll make the best damn fire.
Yeah.
And it's not like Devin didn't know how to make fire.
Right.
And I noticed there was an interesting edit in there that a little bit earlier, when Ben was actually, I think it was when he was out all night, and they started to get up, Devin was the one who went and started the morning fire. They said, oh, hey, Devin, are you going to get the fire started? And he said, yes, and he did. And I think the only reason they left that in wasn't to show that Ben was still not there in the morning. It was to also show that Devin is capable of making the fire.
Yeah.
He just didn't under pressure, and he also, like you said, he had this weird, like, oh, the flint broke, so I'm not going to practice anymore.
Yeah.
Which I felt was a little unfair to him, because I think there was a little more of what you said, that, he didn't feel like he needed to practice anymore because, oh, the flint broke, and I also do know how to make fire.
Yeah. There was just some weird chemistry where, despite the fact that Ben was continuously managing to hang on, everyone still kind of continued to underestimate him. Like just for the fact of they weren't more conscientious in terms of trying to make sure he didn't go looking for an idol or find another one.
Right. And so what his point was, that I think is also, again, it doesn't make for good TV to show us the hours and hours that they do watch him. The fact is, he just outworked them to the point where they just they just couldn't watch him anymore, because he went to work when they weren't willing to watch him.
Yeah, although, like as Desi pointed out, there's 4 of you and 1 of him. You could have made it work.
You definitely could have made it work.
Yeah.
They did underestimate it. At the same time, it's like,
well, to be sure, he made it as difficult as possible.
Yes. Well, and that's where I think, again, that final night and why that was an interesting, as I said before, capstone to this whole process for him is they probably were watching him fairly well. And that was part of his decision making, to say.
You broke up there.
Yeah. So anyway, they probably were watching him fairly carefully and probably rotating and doing all those things. So he decided, okay, well then, in literally the time when no one is willing to watch me, and I don't really want to go look, that's when I'm going to go look, because I'm doing this for something. I want to win. I want to win for my family. I want to win for the Marine Corps. Like, he had all these drivers within him that made him go do it when they were not comfortable following him anymore.
Right.
And, and some of it, I think it was also, no, because it wasn't the last night. It might have been the last night. It was right near there, but it was,
it was the last idol. So it was before it was when there was 5 going to 4.
Right. It was, but I couldn't remember if it was the last night, and that's why. But because I don't think it was the last night. I think he just decided, I need to go find this before anybody else can.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, he had just played the previous idol.
Right. So what I'm saying is, it wasn't like the night before the final tribal or that tribal council.
Right. No, it was the night of the previous one.
It was the night of the previous one. Right. So exactly. Yeah. He took advantage of when they were all kind of went into the decompression mode, because again, they were probably watching him. And so he, like you said, he made it as difficult as possible on them, to the point where they got up the next day and concocted what, honestly, as much as he dismissed their plan and was, it looked silly in the way that it came out, it wasn't a terrible plan.
No.
To use the old idol that Chrissy had with the clue.
Right.
That wasn't bad. And so it was funny, us watching it back and seeing them think how clever they are, and him being like, yeah.
It probably would have worked if he hadn't already found it.
Right. Or also had found like 3 others and knew exactly what they looked like, and that one was dramatically different. I mean, that could have worked a lot of times. That would have been a really smart plan. It made them look foolish because of how it came down, but that's what he did. Like, he outworked them. So by the time they were rested and came up with their plan, he was done already. Like, it's that old adage of, I think it is actually even an armed forces, old ad of, we get more done by, the time you have breakfast than most people get done all day. Like, that's literally what he did.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. He put in the work.
Yeah. They got up, thought of a plan, but he was finished.
Right. So here's a question. I think it's perhaps telling that the votes that he didn't get were from Mike, Ashley, and Devin, namely the 3 people most recently voted out. Mike and Ashley voted for Chrissy, and Devin voted for Ryan. So do we think that that's just because they were sort of they had been that focused on trying to get Ben out, and there was maybe some just anger that they were unsuccessful? Or do you think it was an element of not liking the way he had been acting those last few days? Or do you think it's just kind of coincidence that it worked out that way?
I think it's a combination of probably all 3, honestly. I was going to say coincidence, and that they didn't like how he was acting because they ended up being the recipients of, they're
the ones that had to spend time in camp with him during that period.
Right. And they were the ones that, when he would have these gloating moments in tribal council, that would be the end of their time there.
Yeah.
So they leave with a bad taste of that it happened, and he was the one that caused it. And he was very proud of himself for having done it. And that leaves a negative impression, whether it was specifically like, I didn't like this and that's why I'm not voting for him, or more of that's in the back of their mind when they're watching two strong players present a narrative and then selecting the other one because of the negative impression. That's why I say it's a combination of a coincidence and that. I'm also not, the more I think about it, I'm not 100% convinced that the other piece didn't factor in as well, to do the same thing. Again, to put this negative impression. So again, when you're watching two very good presentations of why we should win, and you have a negative feeling about the person on the right, you might be more inclined to vote for the person on the left.
Yeah.
Now, why Devin voted for Ryan, I'm a little baffled on that one. He didn't really explain.
What he said when he voted was something to the effect of, I didn't think you would be able to make a case for it going in, but then you did. Let's see what Devin votes for Ryan, says he didn't think Ryan would pull it off, but he likes rooting for the underdog, is what he said. So maybe there was an element of he didn't think Ryan was likely to win, but he kind of wanted Ryan to get at least one vote or something like that.
Yeah, that might have been so a euphemism for that. Yeah. I didn't think you'd be able to pull it off. You didn't, so I'm going to give you a vote because I like underdogs and I want you to feel okay. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe there was just an element of Ryan making the pitch better than Devin expected, or just lingering idea of they had kind of been tight, off and on through the through the season.
Yeah.
A lingering affection there.
And he might have felt the same way that, we felt, in that, I really liked Ryan, and in a different scenario, Ryan would have had a shot at he played a good game.
I think, in another season, he could have been the winner, I think.
Yeah, he just got stuck with these powerhouse players at the end with a bunch of bizarre twists, and he just could not adapt. His personality, his strategy, like everything that he set up for Endgame, like he was the one, when Ben kept referring to it as the Ben bomb. Ryan took it truly like that. Like, it blew up everything that he was thinking, and he just couldn't put the pieces back together.
Yeah.
Chrissy would refocus and say, okay, well, here's what we need to do, and one of us needs to win immunity, so I'm going to go do my best to do it, and this is what's going to happen. And Devin was the same way. It's just like, yeah, we still got to get rid of Ben, so somebody's got to win the immunity. Let's go do it. And Ryan was just more like, I'm not going to win the immunity, so hopefully one of them does, and I come along. And he wore that on his sleeve, and that's why he did come along, and why he didn't win, unfortunately. Yeah. He had his skill set. He had no way to truly take control of anything and to make that, signature move, or to be able to make that case. Like you said, he had no case at the end because he didn't do anything except just survive all the bombings.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just briefly kind of scroll through notes from episode 13 just to see if there's any points we want to address that we haven't covered already. Okay. I think they have the whole reward, and it's one of the more bitter ones in terms of the people who didn't get picked to go on the reward being mad. Like Mike, Ashley is a little hangry, as Ben puts it, and then Mike proceeds to go ahead and vent about how Ryan didn't deserve it. And but this is where we have Devin, Chrissy, and Ryan basically trying to make their plan to say they want to be the final three. And that's, I think, that's where it crystallized what their actual plan was throughout the end game. And it just didn't work out that way. Because Ben continued to thwart them. Let's see. I liked the challenge, the immunity challenge in that one. That was the one where they had the bits where the big pile of wood shavings that they had to dive through.
Yep.
I thought that was pretty cool, although I kept being paranoid. How can you be sure someone's not going to jump into a pole and break their neck or something? It just feels, I don't know. That's what gave me anxiety watching it. Otherwise, let's see. There's some discussion early on before Ben finds the new idol of does anyone want to consider voting Ashley before Ben? Maybe, maybe not. But then Ben finds the idol. This is the one that's tied underneath the shelter, which I love. And then this is one of the rare occasions where we don't actually see him find it. We say, it's, they might as well have shown it. He's right there next to it. He says, "I'm not going anywhere until I get it." And then we cut to tribal council. But they don't actually show us him finding it. And, but that's where this is the one where he actually brought it out mid tribal council. Says he's turning everyone against each other. Everyone else is actually kind of criticizing the theatricality of it and his attitude. I actually put in my notes here, Ben is surviving, but the gloating is kind of off-putting. But this is where there was the fun back and forth of okay, you pulled it out of your pocket and you put it around your neck. This is Devin saying, but you might not actually play it. And then Ben's like, "Fine, I'll play it right now." And he gets up and is like, "No one's even voted yet, but all right." I guess it's not a rule that you can't play it yet.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like something that you would do, but yeah.
Ashley is mad going out, but I feel like it seems like she thought they should have voted Mike out instead.
Right, because what Ashley didn't realize, and maybe she will see when she watched it back, is that they had already considered her as an option, so it made it very easy to turn the vote toward her.
Well, we opened up the finale episode with Chrissy saying, "I'm actually kind of glad that Ashley's gone. I mean, I wanted Ben gone first, but I also wanted Ashley gone." So, but yeah, there was a moment though where she won't even hug Devin on the way out. And there's just this moment of him saying, "Oh, ouch." Because he kind of goes in for this and she just blows right by him.
Yep.
But yeah, that's I think the high points of episode 13.
Yeah, I mean it's a good episode, but it just without if it's not fresh and all the other things that have happened since then,
yeah. But then the finale opens up with that whole all night search and then finding another idol, and it's just kind of like, what is even happening? That's a hell of a way for the finale to start, right?
Well, it was because it just made the rest of what happened that day.
Mm-hmm.
If that hadn't have happened, if you try to put yourself in their position, it all makes sense. But we watch it with sort of this weird glee, and not that it's negative, but when Chrissy tries to befriend him, sort of, because she's wants to keep herself in the game in case he wins immunity.
Well, but also possibility of if he's going to go to the jury, maybe we'll want him to not be mad at me. There's that piece of it too, probably.
This is where at this point, he knows that they're coming for him, and he knows he has the idol. So he now can, like what I kind of touched on earlier, his strategy now can match how he actually wants to act.
Mm-hmm.
So when Chrissy comes to him and said, "Oh yeah, I think we should be friends," and like, "Hey, if you win, will you take me?" He's like, "Well, if you win, are you taking me?"
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, He's like, "Exactly."
Yeah.
He just calls her out on it. Whereas, in a different situation, again, a different player, a different situation,
Well,
definitely
yeah.
wouldn't. You try to you'd both posture, and then you both go away and be like, "I'm not sure that's really going to work."
Right.
But he just calls her out and says, like, "Yeah, why would I do that? You won't take me." Like,
Yeah. Well, and then he does say in confessional that his plan is to try to use his idol to blindside her. Doesn't end up working out that way. But that's what he says at this point. But to kind of have the other end of that set of bookends is when he has failed to win the final immunity challenge and thinks that he has no shot left because he doesn't know about the fire making challenge. That's when he now is going back to Chrissy and saying, "So, I remember before when you came to me and we had that whole conversation. Okay, I had to give it a shot." But see, like, I'm just like, I didn't, the way I acted just then is not the way he acted really. But the point being, the shoe was then on the other foot. And he found himself suddenly in a hole that he dug himself.
yes.
And not that I think it would have been possible to convince her, even if he hadn't turned her away before, because he was such a strong competitor that she would want him to get him out. But it's just a perfect example of, if he had handled that other situation better, he might have been starting in a better position in the follow-up conversation. But anyway, we had a pretty cool puzzle in that immunity challenge. This is the one where they had to do swimming and the balance beam, but then the puzzle was that rotating thing with all the different color balls on it.
Yeah, that was cool. That was a new one that they're definitely going to use again.
Yeah, definitely. It was just, it's a cool visual to it. It looks challenging. Possibility you could break your finger by turning it too soon. But Chrissy wins again at this point, and that was second in a row for a third total at that point. And then it was also a reward, and she brought Mike and Devin with her for food. And I liked in the reward that they all kind of sit down at the table and they say, "Okay, first things first, let's make sure see if there's some clue here." Like before they even do anything else, it's like, let's scour everything looking for a clue. And honestly,
what I didn't like was when they didn't find one, their initial default was, well, there must not be one, as opposed to,
why wouldn't there be one? When has there ever not been one?
Right, like, or maybe there isn't one because somebody already has an idol.
Yeah.
And who could that be? Oh, maybe the guy who disappears every night,
Yeah.
So, to your point, like, I want to give Ben credit for outworking them, and I made my case on that.
Oh, yeah.
But I wasn't trying to be, like, dismissive of your argument of that. Yeah, there were many chances where they underestimated and could have, maybe planned a little bit better.
Well, he deserves all the credit for exploiting every single opportunity they gave him.
Yes. That's exactly, I think that is the best point of all of it. And then that's what I said. Like, they gave him an inch, he took a mile.
Yep.
Old expression, absolutely did it. He took every opportunity.
Yeah. Now, that said, I did like their plan. We talked about this a little bit already. The plan to take the old dead super immunity idol, and that whole thing. That was a good plan that may have worked if he had not already actually found it.
Right.
But
and here's this is when I first started. Not that I didn't like Devin up to this point, but where I really had an affinity for him, and would have been if Ben had not won the fire making challenge, I would have also been satisfied with Devin winning.
mm-hmm.
Not just because of his choice that we talked about already with the fire, with going into that with a good attitude, but the beginning here where he's like,
yeah,
guys, I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I agree. Because we actually have a scene where Chrissy and Ryan are like, oh, he totally bought it. And then we cut to confessional with Ben saying, they just did me a huge favor. Now I don't have to pretend to look anymore.
I know. That was so funny. Like, I get to chill now. Like, I don't even have to fake it.
Yeah. I loved that. But you're right that Devin is the one that kind of is suspicious about that. And because he is suspicious, he saves himself.
He does.
Yeah. Yeah. So that I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, and I think because of how big like the later moves were, we left this out of our kind of our initial summation and our talk about what Devin has in his arsenal had he gone to the end. This is actually in there, and I had not forgotten that it happened, but it wasn't fresh in my mind. But when going back through these notes, like this is also another thing where he can say, "I was going to be voted out. I recognized that Ben could have an idol, and I took steps to make sure I didn't get voted out, survived that revote, then, jumped in or was asked to be the one to defeat Ben in the fire and then did. Devin, I don't know that he would have beaten Chrissy, but he would have had a very, very good case.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that I think Chrissy wins if Devin had won the fire making challenge, but I agree it still would have been another 3 where I could have been happy with all 3 that they were all 3 worthy players.
Yes.
And yeah, his going with his gut in this critical moment was really great to see. So at that tribal council, there was actually discussion there about how they can't babysit Ben 24/7. There's the whole business about her pulling out the fake necklace. And the whole business with Chrissy giving her fake idol to Mike, but then hashtag Ben bomb. The early bird gets the worm. Which again, more of the gloating is not necessarily productive, but at least that's an excellent use of that aphorism.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, though, I mean, the train is down the tracks. I mean,
well, sure. I'm just saying that, like, he is still, at this point, needing to make the case to the jury, as well as survive to get to the end, right? So it's...
Well, could I present an alternative, though? And especially when we were discussing earlier the way the votes went, in the final, is that the other people on the jury, the Laurens, the Joes, the Coles, this plays to them.
That's true, I suppose. Yeah,
because they're removed from it, and
it's exciting. It's a show.
This is exciting and interesting because they're not the ones who are the subject of what happens. They are the ones entertained by it.
That's true. That's true.
And I hadn't thought that before until we just kind of got to that, and I said, that is, there's potential that's part of what was going on. Not that he, and again, not. Now I'm gonna take the credit away from Ben, not full credit away from him. But earlier I was saying, he recognized his own limitations and then behaved in a way, and so his strategy matched who he was as a person. I don't think he was doing it because he knew that was going to get him votes. I also don't think that it hurt him.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on both counts, that he was surviving in a hostile environment, namely everyone wanted him to vote him out, by essentially making them the enemy, at which point enjoying the schadenfreude of them being frustrated, was part of that mindset that he'd put himself in.
Right. And so you get all the people who are now a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks removed, and they're also enjoying the people who are still there when they're not, being subject to the same thing that they were subject to, and respecting it.
Yep. So in any event, the votes would have gone for Ben, except that he has his idol. And it would have been 4 for Ben that do not count, and then Ben's 1 vote for Devin, sending Devin home, if not for Devin playing his gut and voting for Mike instead, which makes it a 1-1 tie. And then when there's a revote, everyone sends Mike home. Mike goes out basically saying he still thinks he would have won if he had made it to the final 3. And we're like, yeah, okay, sure. All right.
You're out now. You can take that with you.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I think like we said earlier, I think he ended up a sharper player than he seemed like he would be at the beginning.
Yeah. But I think, I don't want to say that the confessional they chose to use earlier defines him, but it definitely gave some insight into why he was kind of always off kilter with everybody. It was the one where he says why Ben is dangerous, and he says because Ben actually needs the $1 million and is going to use it for his family, and that puts a motivation and a fire within him that everybody else doesn't have. For example, I don't need the $1 million. I just want to win. And he didn't mean it to sound like that elitist or dickish, really. But it just showed where his mentality was, for, what Ben was doing. And he was accurate. When you have a fire to do something, you are going to be better than everybody else at doing it. And he wasn't playing this like this was a chess game that if he loses, he goes home and starts over again. Like Ben was treating this like he was treating this like a battle, and the results show for themselves. Just like in a battle, you don't always control everything,
right?
But you have to take every opportunity that's given to you.
Exactly.
Absolutely did. So
that is what Ben did. That I think. I mean, there's no question. I mean, that's why he won, and it's why he deserved to win.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And I also do think it did show a little bit of why, Mike was always a little bit off with everybody, because he did kind of see this as he's a participant, but he was almost kind of like a spectator of the game, even though he was playing it.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and that's what that comment meant to me.
Yep. I wouldn't be surprised if that's, I don't know, that's maybe too broad a judgment. I was going to say, I wonder if that's part of just how he kind of lives his life. You know what I mean? Like as someone who's frequently inside her own head, I think that I can recognize that trait in him too, is that I think he probably treats a lot of his own experiences as though he is an observer rather than a participant. Not in not a judgmental way, as just as that just seems kind of like that's part of his approach to the world, as he is observing things and not always fully in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. With Mike out, Ben knows that there are no more Ben bombs, and so he feels like he has to win the challenge. And how about that challenge?
Man, good TV.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good challenge for it, both just by design and just the way that it played out. But the editing of that sequence was pretty incredible too. Kept the tension up just really, really well. That was an expertly presented challenge, on top of the fact that it was just well designed to begin with, and the fact that key things like that that upside down U. Now, like, imagine if Ben hadn't won. It's like, they talked about like, oh, it would haunt him. But yeah, I mean, that had to be just because he would have won if he just not placed that one letter upside down.
Yep.
Wow. That was crazy.
It was so crazy, so unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to have it be so close to a victor being declared, only to have it fall back, and then for having everybody just continue to fall after that, and it just keeps this roller coaster of emotions that we're feeling throughout the rest of that challenge. It was amazing. I was just that was a hell of a challenge.
Oh, I was on the edge of my seat like the whole time, and
yeah, lost you a little bit there. You were on the edge of your seat. I lost you after that.
Oh, I was just saying, cheering and being disappointed, and oh yes and no, yeah, no, everything, every emotion that you get when watching a competition, like this had all of it.
Yeah, it was great. And so I think part of this was part of where I, in my head, kind of flipped the switch to say that I was rooting for Chrissy. Not that I was rooting against her or for anyone else specifically before, but I think that's where I kind of made my mental decision, was her winning this. Partly because not even just winning it, but wanting her to win it so that she would tie the record. I think it was what started that in my head. Is that I kind of wanted her to be able to tie the record, and then everything else kind of just clicks into place after that. So I was really happy for her winning, especially, just given that it was the record. But obviously Ben is super bummed because he knows exactly what that means, or at least what he thinks it will mean. And it's interesting because this is where we had back at camp Ben feeling really bummed and having to eat crow a little bit coming to Chrissy, and she promises to hear him out at tribal council, which is, I think, a fairly gracious way to handle the opposite side of the conversation when he, compared to when they had the reverse situation. But when we find out the advantage, that was
she did everything that she could. She did everything that she needed to do to win this game, except prevent Ben from being able to exploit the other parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah. If not for this unexpected twist and the fact that he was able to prevail even without foreknowledge.
Right.
Yeah. If not for that, I think she wins. So.
Oh, absolutely. She played a good enough game to win in a normal situation. This was not the hand that was dealt. He played that hand better.
Yep. Yep. So I had mixed feelings at first with the twist. Partly, I think, because my emotions tied up in it was rooting for Chrissy at that point and recognizing that this twist means they can't make sure that Ben will go home.
So I was feeling the opposite way.
Yeah, well, I can imagine.
I had sort of resigned to the fact that Ben couldn't win, and was starting to get on board with Chrissy winning. And then this twist comes up, and it's like,
hope
Ben still has a chance.
Yeah.
And I also go down this whole like, well, yeah, but if he loses to Devin, Devin's got a chance. This is going to get really interesting. Because when Chrissy won that, I was on the same. While I wasn't rooting against her, but I wasn't rooting for her. When she won that challenge, I was in the same mindset as you, in that, oh well, I mean, she's probably going to win. And then this comes up, and it's like, well, there's two potential people who are going to compete for that win. this is really interesting. And I got really stoked about watching,
Yeah.
the rest of this.
I think that once I sort of processed through not just what it meant for this season, but just the value of this change in the rules as it can be applied to future seasons is what brought me around on the twist a little bit. Not that I hated it, but that I just was ambivalent at first.
That's fair.
Yeah, but I did like the exchange though of her and Ryan in the shelter, and he's just like, "So, how fun will this twist be, Chrissy?" She's just like 0, because it's just like it ruins everything, honestly. Yeah.
So after this happened, I wanted to go through the exercise, and I thought it would be, at the time, I thought it would be fun to go through it on here.
Okay.
However, when I settled on my answer, I think you'll probably come to the same conclusion. What if Ben had won? Who would he have taken?
Oh, if he had won the challenge.
Yes.
That's interesting. Let me think about it. I think he wants to win. He had previously talked about wanting to eliminate Chrissy as his biggest competition. And I think, because it's the genius of this twist, like the more I think about it, is just how tricky that is, because I think he makes the same decision that she did. I think he picks Ryan.
Yep. And that's why I ultimately was like, when I thought I was like, oh, this is going to be a great thing to talk about.
Yeah.
And I wrote it down, and then I was like, oh, but he would do the exact same thing. Like, he would have taken Ryan, because he would want to guarantee that he at least, because he knew he could make a case against Ryan.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
He knew that both Devin and Chrissy would be more difficult.
Right.
And he also knew, okay, so let's say he knew he could beat Devin. To your point, he doesn't want to face Chrissy.
Exactly.
So if he puts Ryan versus Chrissy, she probably has a much better chance of making fire. Like, Ryan was really like that defunct at making fire, apparently.
Yeah.
Now he is ensured that he's competing against the two best players, like not best, but the two who have the most chance to win votes at this point, based on what's happened. And yeah, so I think he makes the same decision, which,
Yeah, he's basically just like Chrissy made her decision based on what gives me the highest chance of eliminating Ben. He makes the same decision in reverse, that what gives him the highest chance of eliminating Chrissy. I think that's how he would make the call. But it is still just such a fascinating thing, because you're in this position of you in some ways, there's an element where we've talked about before, the idea of a strong player gets eliminated just before the end, when this gives them a chance to make it through. But it also increases the likelihood that one of the, that the weakest of the four will get to the end. But I guess that's always going to happen anyway, because nobody ever votes out the weakest of the four at 4.
Well, here is the calculus that changes that a little bit, though, and why I was somewhat interested if Devin had won, what would have happened. Is if you bring the weakest of the 4 with you, are you now setting up on that fire-making challenge that the winner of that
gets to look good coming out of it?
Are they? Yeah, if they're 2 strong players, are they stronger coming out of that than you are?
Yeah.
So that was my second thought, is what if Chrissy had taken Ben and said, I took Ben because I want to compete against the best. I didn't want, when it came down to this was the decision, you have to make it, you have to put somebody up to make fire. So you can't just get rid of the person that you think is your biggest competition. And I said, you know what? My case that I'm going to make tonight is better than his. So I decided that he would be there, so he would not have the opportunity to win the fire challenge and add that to his resume.
Mm.
And I don't know that that would have worked in this one.
Yeah,
but it's
but it might
forward.
work in another. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting twist. There's a lot of new math that has to get done, so to speak. But in any event, she picks Ryan as everyone kind of predicted. And then the fire making challenge just does not go well for Devin at all. He just he blows it. Not that it's easy, but yeah, Ben beats him easy, handily. And so when we knew the final three, I put in my notes that I figured that the votes would split between Chrissy and Ben. And the fact that Ryan got one, I kind of like that he got one vote.
Yeah, I liked Ryan. I think Ryan would be a good returning player. I think Ryan absolutely knows the game and plays it well. It just didn't come together this time for him.
No. I think if I were going to give him advice for coming back on a future season, I would say that even though he knows that the physical stuff is never going to be his strong suit, that he should probably make sure that he is being very helpful at camp to make up for it. Because it sounded like there was a little bit of discussion in the final that he maybe didn't really do either one.
Yeah, that he relied only on his social bonds. Yeah.
Yeah. Which ultimately was not, the fact that he wasn't doing anything else ultimately kind of hurt his social bonds.
Yes.
But in any event, we get to, excuse me. I have the same mixed feelings about the way they do the final tribal council that I did the first time they did it this way. Namely that I like the popcorn style, but I feel like the division into the outwit, outplay, outlast portions feels arbitrary and forced.
And I reiterate what I believe was my same position at the time, is that you have to carve it into some sort of format. So
yeah,
what is wrong with this?
Well, I just don't like the categories. I don't feel like they make sense. Outwit kind of works, but then no, yeah. So I mean, I know they want to have it thematically, but I would have rather they just, instead of trying to call it outwit, outlast, outplay, I would rather they call it social, physical, strategic.
I feel like that's what they're doing. They've just tried to.
Well, but see, that's the element of it that I don't like, is they're trying to make outwit be social and outplay be strategic and physical, and then outlast be also kind of strategic.
That's fair. Yeah, if like outwit was strategic, outplay was social, and outlast was physical, and they just agreed to those terms, even though they're not perfect, it would be cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like the popcorn discussion more than having each individual jury member come up and give a spiel. And I think that it was probably a smart thing to get away from that, just because as much as it was sometimes interesting TV drama to have someone bitter on the jury give a really venomous speech, ultimately, I don't really like what that does to the feeling we have at the end.
Yep.
So I feel like getting away from that is a good thing.
It started to become more about the jury member giving a theater posture as opposed to an actual discussion of the merits of the game.
I loved how how chill the chemistry was with everyone this time. Even when it started to get just the teeniest bit heated, we have Desi jump in and just say, "Come on, guys! I'm proud to have played with every one of you, and this is like you over there and you over here, and come on, we got to play a cool game." and that just chilled everybody out. I thought that was great.
100% agree.
Yeah. Let's see. So I'm just scanning through to see if there was anything else that I thought was really worth getting into.
I did not find it. Well, I thought the only thing that was interesting was that because of how good the final episode was, they let all of this eat into their time.
Yeah, it was pretty short.
I was happy about that. Like,
right.
This was so much more fun than watching. Like, again, I mean, the reunion shows are fine, but
I agree. I mean, there have definitely been seasons where this part took 40 minutes of the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this one was more like 20, I think. If that.
Well, I'm not saying that not only was it 20, but it was the 20 minutes that was the front end of the reunion show.
Yeah.
So it cut down how long the reunion show was because of how much.
Oh, yeah.
They took out, like, so they had to actually, like, make the reunion show. So it was a success in that it was, it reduced the time of the final tribal council and also reduced the time of the reunion show.
I think that the reunion show was maybe not reduced as much as it initially seems, because I think the live segments we got in between during the actual episode were longer, I think, than they have been in the past. So maybe they just spaced it out a bit more.
That's true.
Maybe. I mean, I think you're right in to a great degree, though, that that it was shorter to give more time for the episode.
Right. So, but whether it was that they spaced it out more or not, like, I preferred this format. It was less of, let's dive in and try to catch up with everybody and how they felt at this certain moment. Like, no, I mean, we just want to watch the moments. We're not here to watch them, like, reflect on how they might have felt 6 months ago, Yeah.
So a couple of the exchanges I liked from the final here. There was the fun bit of Ashley saying to Ryan, like, "Why did you never have a strategy conversation with me?" And he's saying, "Well, you see, I was still partnered with Devin, and all of the strategy involving you was filtered through him." And then everyone just kind of immediately does that, the tennis court pivot. Devin, is that true? And he's suddenly like, kind of. and Ryan had to have been just sitting there going, shit. That did not go as well as I would have maybe ideally wanted that exchange to go, but all right. This ties into what you were saying earlier too, in terms of how Ben, even with the imperfections in his social game, managed to insert that into his narrative in a way that was ultimately, like, not that it was helpful to have had a poor social game, but that it was definitely not as harmful as it might have been for someone else, because he talked about his struggles with the social side of things and he put that different spin on it, and it became part of his narrative, which, worked for him in a way that it might not work for other people.
Because it was genuine,
right?
It wasn't,
yeah.
I mean, I know you didn't mean it when you said he put the spin on it, because I mean, like, that is a legitimate term,
right? Yeah, I did not mean to suggest any sort of like a cynical element to it. I think it's real, but I think it's also true that he kind of uses that reason to justify some bad behavior.
Yep.
So, I think both can be true, right?
Right.
Which
Oh,
is, yeah.
I'm agreeing with you. I just, spin is taken on kind of a pejorative,
Yeah.
term, and that's not what he was doing, but you are accurate in what you're
Mhm.
talking about.
Yeah.
So.
So let's see. Chrissy says she got to the end by staying loyal to her alliances instead of making a million different moves, which I wasn't sure if that was really actually true, but it certainly presented her as having a very different strategy than Ryan. So it was a successful answer in that regard. I'm not sure how true it actually was. I mean, I suppose she didn't do any big betrayals necessarily, or like, I don't know. I can't. I'd have to kind of go back the past episodes, but it didn't feel true to me in the moment.
No, I mean, remember at one point she was aligned with Ben, so it like, clearly she didn't, but she could always say like, well, that wasn't as true of an alliance, or
Right.
once he pretended to be, when he went as a double agent, I lost that. Yeah, you could have delved into it, but
yeah. Now,
but it's not so false that it didn't ring true to people.
Right. Now, as far as how well she did in the final tribal council, I think one of her all-star moments there was, especially in the context of Ben's social game, her basically saying, I got to know all of you as people, and that relationship was real, and then I used that not cynically, but as a way to understand you. It wasn't just like a trick, but it was through that understanding that I was able to navigate through the game. And then Joe actually goes, oh, right, like, actual personal things about everybody, do me. And she's just like, okay, well, I know that you are worried about getting married because your parents' marriage went so badly, and you're worried about repeating that pattern. And he's just kind of like, oh, snap. Okay, that's actually a really good answer. So yeah, objection withdrawn.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Let's see. Cole wants to ask about the idea to target him for stealing peanut butter. And it's interesting here because
Cole would have been the guy who would have taken the stage had it been the other.
Yeah.
Just to make a big thing about this.
Yeah. Now, what was interesting, I thought, was that Ben tried to pitch it as a strategic move, and Ryan tried to interrupt to say that it was actually a personal grudge. And we know that it was actually both, but I feel like personal grudge in the moment was kind of the larger reason at the time. But at the same time, the way that Ben gave his answer here and the way that Ryan tried to undercut it just made Ben look better.
Yep.
And as we saw, Cole voted for Ben. Let's see. Just we get a lot of the stuff we kind of talked about already. I did like Ryan's suggestion that he managed to never be the target, because even though he wasn't contributing in some of the traditional ways, like being a challenge winner or food provider, he basically he was always useful. And that was kind of his pitch. It's not that he was dragged along because no one thought he would win, is that he was always useful to whoever was in power. And I think that like, that's maybe partly true.
That was spin. That was spin.
But it's an example, though, of what he said his strategy was going to be, which is to try to present himself as having been in control all the time, even though that's not true. And I thought that was a good way to present it. So you're right that it's spin in the context that it is a filtered version of the truth constructed in order to try to make him look as good as possible.
Right.
And I thought
because
it was...
at one point, he had to use an idol on himself because he was worried that he was going to be voted out.
Mhm.
And while he did not receive the majority of the votes, he still did receive votes and use an idol to burn them. That is not someone who is so in control that they're never a target.
Well, we know that he wasn't always in control.
Or not always a target. I mean, he had to use the idol because he was potentially a target.
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying that.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just I'm pointing out, that
I'm just talking about him doing the best he can to present his game as worthy of winning, and I thought that was a good argument to make.
And I think what I'm pointing out is that it's even easier to call him on, like you said, you're not sure that Chrissy's presentation of how she maintained her alliances was 100% true. Like his are just even so much more fresh. Right,
but even that example that you're talking about, he only got the votes because they were splitting in case of an idol. Am I misremembering the episode in which that happened?
You might be right. I'm not. I mean, I remember he had an idol. He wasn't. I thought he wasn't.
So this was in episode 11, where Joe was voted out with the majority of votes, and the other 4 votes went split 2 and 2, Ashley and Ryan. But okay, so I don't remember the details of how that all played out, but I don't care because wasn't ever my argument anyway.
It was the one where he legitimately thought he was potentially a target, but this was one of the ones where people didn't know where he was on it.
Right, that was where he was still the secret agent.
Right.
Yeah.
So
my dog is snoring.
Simple point was that there were more dramatic moments when Ryan was, not in control and not a target than there were that what Chrissy's, was proposing, which was that she never, used her alliance, or she always used her alliance. So that's all I'm saying is that it started to draw these differences, and even just the way they were putting things forward. Yes, all 3 of them weren't 100% accurate, but his was the easiest to disprove, which we knew because we,
Yeah, I think that's a stronger statement of it than I would make, but I don't disagree completely. It's just a matter of degree. In any event, though, he also had a good answer about when Mike asks him what he's learned from the game, and his answer of how much it meant to him to see his dad gave him a reminder of, what the important things in life are. I thought that was a pretty good answer. I mean, he wasn't going to win, but not a bad answer to that question.
No.
Joe had a weird comment about Ben seeming like he was giving up in the final, which I hadn't had that impression at all, so I'm not sure where that comes from. But yeah, we had a bit in the live show where Probst gives a little girl in the audience a little vote, to see if she's going to guess the same as the jury. And even though we got a brief cut to her later, we didn't ever go back to talk to her. But yeah, so the votes, we had 1 vote for Ryan from Devin, 2 votes for Chrissy from Mike and Ashley, and Ben wins with the remainder of the votes. I have very little to talk about from the reunion show, other than just the the live reunion with Ben's Marine buddies struck me as something that, like, I mean, it's interesting, but it also kind of vaguely felt like something that's not necessarily cool to spring on someone in that context. I don't know. I mean, it worked out, but I just means like he hasn't seen them in 12 years and they describe it as you were in a bad place the last time we saw you. That just feels like a possible recipe for problems. I mean, maybe.
Their initial reunion was great with all the hugging, high-fiving, all that stuff. But yeah, like you said, the conversations were odd, like for TV. Not that they were odd to have. Like they were like, yeah, like you said, last time we saw him, he was in a bad place, and it's so good to see him winning. And it's
I get
you want to learn more about his journey.
They wanted to hit that idea that he could be inspiring to other vets that might be suffering, and I like that pitch, but I feel like maybe talking to veterans that felt that way as opposed to specific people from his past that he hasn't seen in a long time, you don't know what might actually be between the lines there. And also, for that matter, you run the risk of taking Ben, who's just won $1 million, and putting him in an entirely different headspace.
Yeah.
So I thought that it seemed to work out fine, but that if I had been a producer, might have advised caution with that particular thing in the live show.
I think they could have used a more traditional, scrolling of, highlights from letters they'd received or Twitter comments, here are all the positive things Marines are saying about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like yeah. I felt the same way. Literally the only thing other than that I took from the reunion show was that their preview video for the next one was literally the most uninteresting thing ever.
Well, so now, they had the one that was like 10 seconds.
Yeah, they filled it out a little bit later.
Yeah.
But when they were like, here's your sneak peek, and it was like a skull, and it's like Ghost Island. You're like, what? That's not. That doesn't.
There was a flash that I paused on because a flash of a sign that said "One bad decision can haunt you forever," and I regretted the amount of time it took me to pause on that because they just made it really obvious later. But yeah, that's all. It was definitely a tease, which is fine, I guess, but it also just felt like.
But it didn't.
It oversold what they actually gave us when we're only just going to have to wait 10 minutes and get a much broader preview. So why bother?
Right. It seemed like a lot of work for something that did not get me excited. I wasn't like, oh man, like I wasn't teased. Like I wasn't like, oh yeah, I can't wait to see what this is. I was like,
right.
WTF? Like, I am not sure what this season's about. I guess I'll have to wait for them to describe it. Like, why put the production value into that? So anyway, that was my only other note. The rest of it was all fine.
Yeah. The whole concept, first of all, Survivor Ghost Island is a great title. And I'm intrigued to see how they actually implement this idea that these haunted totems of past Survivor bad mistakes and bad decisions somehow can come into play. Like it seems like there's a game of chance involved somehow, but they were really vague on what it actually meant to try to take some haunted idol and then you do something with it. Like, could you redeem it? Like, bring it back to the good side, or would it screw you over somehow? And it seems like they're setting up that's it. There's some sort of a gamble element to it.
Right.
So I'm interested to see what that actually means. But I do like Ghost Island.
I took it as they're going to dump a bunch of crazy shit into the game, and they're like pre-excusing themselves.
Well, but they showed like a bunch of these sort of artifacts, like in this little shack where a bunch of things were like hanging from the ceiling, and like
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with your interpretation. The way my feeling that I was left with was that they were just excusing themselves to just introduce a bunch of just whatever they wanted, which is okay. Like, it's their game,
yeah.
you know?
They definitely said things about game of chance, though, and making decisions regarding
See,
making a choice to
the way
try
that I
to
saw
redeem
it
a haunted
was, like,
artifact.
you would get the stick,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd have to gamble. Like, it may or may not work this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's how they're going to do it, but like that's the feeling I got from it.
Yeah.
Is like, this time it might be a real idol, or it might just still be a stick.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to use it?
Yeah.
And it's like, so I'm just like you said, I'm in the same place that you are. I just want to wait and see how it all plays out. I'm interested.
Mm-hmm.
I like that they're changing it up. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're running down the end of the show. I mean, we all know that. I mean, it's still
Mm-hmm.
doing very well, but at the same time, when Probst isn't going to do it forever, and
Mm-hmm.
is it really going to maintain after he leaves? Is Burnett going to leave? Like, I mean, we don't know that it has any longevity past the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just enjoy the kind of the way out, and let's see what they do. Yeah,
Past the 30th? What?
or not third. Isn't it the 30th? Isn't that what Probst is committed through?
This season we just did was 35.
Oh, the 40th. Then I think he's committed through.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, my mistake. Yeah.
I was just confused. Okay, so in any event, I think that kind of covers all of this. I think Ben is a worthy winner who, managed to win over other worthy players. And it was a great final half of the season with a lot of good people still in the game. Playing well in some instances and making understandable and entertaining mistakes in others.
Yep. Overall entertaining, though.
Yep, definitely. So I think that'll probably do it for this episode. Just before we sign off, I want to just, as a personal note, to let everyone know that my dog Luna recently incurred some large veterinary bills, and so I have set up a GoFundMe about that. And I'll put the link in the notes here. And if you feel like you would like to support, that would certainly be appreciated. Or if you could just spread the word, that would be great too. I'm not going to be out on the street or anything, but I did have to borrow some money, so just let everyone know that that's a thing. But otherwise, we'll be back in the spring for Survivor Season 36.
Yay.
All right. So, good night, everybody.
Good night.